Alrighty guys, we got a John Deere X330 on the bench with the Briggs & Stratton V-twin. As you can tell, it's been sitting, not gonna lie, and finally got it to crank, and it's running under its own power, but it's surging at idle, and whenever you throttle it up, it's popping through the intake because it's starving for gas. So we know that we have a fuel delivery issue. It's going to be inside the carburetor, probably a jet stopped up. But other than that, let's go ahead and get this carburetor cleaned up and see if we can't fix the surge and the wide open throttle pop. Here's a good look at the model number. To get this carburetor off, we're going to have to do a little surgery. We're going to have to pull the blower shroud. I've already loosened up the chopper screen here. Right on, there's one here, here, and here, and then 3 more on the other side. Go ahead and loosen and remove the fuel pump. You can leave all the lines on there. You don't have to take them all the way out. Just loosen them and just lift off the shroud. Remove the 2 7mm plastic screws. There's one here. And there's one right down in here, which I've already loosened. Pull the air box off from the gas tank here. Super careful when you pull this line off, because this is just a plastic fitting made to this air horn. If you break that off, you gotta buy a whole new air horn. I've seen that done before. Go ahead and remove the PCV hose. Just pops out of its bore there. Typical Briggs & Stratton style connection. Just wiggle it out of the way. It'll be fine just like that. Go ahead and slide your clamp down and remove the fuel hose from the fuel pump to the carburetor. Just disconnect that right here. At this point, we're ready to start pulling the intake bolts, the intake manifold bolts. There's one here, here, and one here, and one right here. Just go ahead and loosen all those off. Once you get it all loose, you can just take the manifold and carburetor assembly and just let it lay backwards. And then we need to take a quick look at the choke linkage. The only thing that we need to do now is disconnect the throttle linkage, which is here. And as you can tell, it's just a J hook. So let's just turn the carburetor assembly like this and unhook that. Before we jump the gun too far, we need to go ahead and remove the choke cable. Should have done that first, but it's all right. Just loosen this clamp here and just slide the choke out of its hole there. Just kind of turn it to the side here and remove the linkage like that. And then remove the spring like that. And now the carburetor should be 100% free. Crack your nuts loose on the air horn. They're just a 7/16, one on each side. Really can't get a socket in there because of the way it's made. But once you crack it loose with a wrench like this, you'll just be able to free wheel it off with your fingers. Not a real huge fan of this Nikki style carburetor, but I'm going to show you a few key points what you need to do to make these carburetors work. Get these studs off, and I don't have the inverted Torx here at the shop, but I do have some at the More Medic 1 shop at home. But what we can do, you can take a nut and thread it on, and take the other nut and thread it on. And jam those two nuts together, and then we'll be able to take the studs out. And just do the same thing for this side. And just leave it together on this one because you'll be putting it together and tightening it the same way. Swing the carburetor off the choke linkage here. Go ahead and invert it. I'm going to go to my parts washer and clean all this external junk off of here before we start getting into the center of this carburetor. Go ahead and then crack your bowl nuts loose. There's just two, one on each side. Slide your bowl off, being careful not to rip the gasket. If this carburetor had some hours on it, I would definitely replace this gasket. I always did in the past, but this is a fairly new carburetor. It's been only setting up for a handful of months. That gasket's gonna be okay. Now you have your carburetor body, and then we have our bowl and jet assembly right here. So let's go ahead and pull the emulsion tube assembly. This is your emulsion tube float chamber. Everything's right here. Go ahead and pull your float assembly out, your emulsion tube assembly, being careful not to damage this surface right here where the O-ring is down in the bowl. This O-ring's probably okay. If you have any doubt, replace this O-ring. Anti-after-fire solenoid off of the bowl, because this is where the main fuel entry is going to be in this carburetor. You want to be sure that we blow that passage out really well. The main parts that you want to clean on this carburetor is the main jet. As we can tell, it's not too bad. Just leave it installed. You can take and put a punch down through here, right here, and push the jet out this way. But I usually just leave them installed and clean them just like they sit. Emulsion tube, transfer ports, transfer holes are clear, which these are not, probably contributing to the surge. So let's go ahead and get this carburetor body cleaned up. And we're going to flush the idle circuit through here. And since this does not have an idle screw, and I do not have a replacement Welch plug, I am not going to pull the Welch plug on this carburetor. If you have to end up pulling Welch plugs on these because it's so corroded and so gummed up, you might as well just replace the carburetor. If we can do just a simple disassembly and flush this thing out with some carb cleaner, then that's what we are aiming for. And hopefully that will get us going once again. Go ahead and flush out all of your air bleeds. And this is an air bleed for your fuel transition ports in the back. These ports right here that transition from wide open to idle. Whenever you flush, you should see a huge stream of carb cleaner coming through right here. Just about out of carb cleaner. And just blow everything out with compressed air. Dry it all off, and then we'll reassemble it. Here's a little tech tip for you. Whenever you go to put the bowl back on, not the bowl, but the float assembly, just put a little bit of transmission assembly grease. Is called goo, assembly goo. Just a little bit on there, so whenever you press it down into the O-ring, it doesn't tear the O-ring. Plus, you want to be able to turn this thing to line it up. You want to be able to turn it like that. If you don't lubricate that O-ring, you could cut it, pinch it, whatnot. Put you some assembly goo right here on this O-ring. It's not going to hurt if you get it on this surface here. Gas is just going to wash it off anyway. Trickiest part, go ahead and get your gasket put on here, the O-ring, and then take your carburetor. We're going to set it down together. Try not to disturb that gasket, and then we're going to cam this around to where it starts into that gasket or that O-ring, and then we're going to push the carburetor in, and then we should be able to turn it and line up our bolt holes. You can just go ahead and cinch your screws down. Just go ahead and, I like to call it the suck test. Invert your carburetor, put your mouth on the nipple, and it should hold. It should hold for a while. If it bleeds off within a couple of seconds, then you know you got something wrong with your needle and seat. So I'm gonna take it apart. I'm not gonna bore you with putting it all back together. In the next shot, you'll see the carburetor mounted onto the intake manifold. Here's a quick view of the choke linkage setup. It goes in the, well, you can't put it in the wrong hole because this hole's way too small for the rod. So that's one way you can't screw that up. Here's a shot of your throttle rod and spring. Once you get the spring put on, it's going to just slip right behind this rod right here. The rod's going to make an S shape and it will stay in place once you get the spring installed. Back onto the engine, so let's go ahead and get that part of it done. One thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have O-ring protrusion. If your O-rings are not sticking above your flange, then you need to replace them. These O-rings are good, so we're going to go ahead and put it on. Alrighty, we got it mounted back to the engine, and let's just see if we can get it to light off and run good. Got a good idle, good wide open throttle. John Deere X330 going one more time for the customer. And if this helped you out, please give me a thumbs up and hit that like button and subscribe. And while you're there, you might as well just click the little bell. That way you know you get all the new videos. So y'all have a good rest of your week. More Medic One. Have a good day.